So how granular should you go in measuring NPS? Should you ask likelihood to recommend the brand, for example, or the products the brand produces, or even the product features?
We suggest you ask NPS at the brand level, but there are two guiding principles that are important to bear in mind. Firstly, what is meaningful to your customers, and secondly, what level of granularity can your organization actually work with? So firstly, let's take a look at what is meaningful to your customers. For example, you have an NPS touchpoint program in place to understand customer satisfaction with your call center. We've seen examples where companies have asked how likely a customer would be to recommend the call center. But customers do not recommend call centers to each other, do they? So this isn't the right question to ask. They recommend the company and talk about the call center as an example of why it is a good company to deal with. Ask the NPS question at a brand level. For example, how likely would you be to recommend Apple, not how likely you would be to recommend Apple's call center. Then include questions to understand the call center interaction and whether it was positive or negative. The second consideration is what level of granularity can your organization actually deal with. Let's use another example, mobile phones. Using the principles I've just mentioned, you wouldn't ask a customer how likely they would be to recommend the buttons on the handset or the color of the casing. Customers just don't recommend these things in isolation. But it could be meaningful to ask how likely they would be to recommend the handset. But you then need to decide whether you have the budget, the time, the systems, etc. to run an NPS program for each and every handset your company produces. A far more pragmatic approach would be to ask likelihood to recommend the company, make sure you also know which handset they are using, and then look at which handset users are more likely to be promoters or detractors. Again, brand level works well. So ask your customers how likely they are to recommend your brand. Do not try to ask, for example, about product features or customer help. That's just not what ordinary people recommend to their friends. And you may want to ask the Net Promoter question for products, because that is again something that people talk about in isolation.